we see that cells does everything with proteins, and now we can see that we have quite good number of proteins in our cells, individual cells, be it a prokaryote, be it a fungus, that's yeast, and be it HeLa cell, that's our living human cell. So depends on the size, because uh, this is a straight calculation, so there is a bit of non-linearity when you actually see proteomic data, but we can say that number of proteins is proportional to the size, and which is again proportional to the complexity, right? So you have more complex functions, you need more number of proteins. Now let's see what are the basic types of proteins they can have, cells can have. So what are the most abundant proteins? Here is a graph which is this looks like a mosaic tile, but here are the names of the proteins, exactly. If you see here, in case of your TB bacteria, you see these are the proteins which you see most in the TB bacteria. These largest tiles are representing the major proteins. If you see, this is the E. coli casein. E. coli, you see this is the protein you see, which is largest quantity. Um, and in case of a human cell, you see this kind of protein here. The name isn't clear, so, but you can see the largest tiles are 1, 2, 3. These are probably the largest tiles here. That means these are the maximum number of proteins you have in the eukaryotic, at least human cell, and other proteins are there in your prokaryotic cells. Now, what are these proteins do? Every protein do have its function, right? So when you zoom out, you see this first graph. Um, in case of prokaryotes also, you see the major proteins comes prokaryote, and of course, if it is a parasitic one, you see the major number of proteins go and work in glycolysis pathway. This is a pathway which glyco for sugar, lysis meaning breaking, sugar breaking. That's the best thing they do. And this cycle or this kind of reactions doesn't need oxygen. Okay, that means you can still get energy, I mean ATP, without oxidizing with oxygen. There are other ways of oxidation of glucose. So it makes sense, right? If it is an anaerobic or it's a parasitic organism, it stays inside some other organism, and it may not always, stay in a place where ample amount of oxygen is there. So if they stay in deep-seated tissues, there is high chances they may not get proper oxygen. So they have that their adaptation, they can get a lot of energy from this glycolysis pathway. So the proteins involved in making this proteins, or enzymes, as we discussed, enzymes are one of the most common forms of proteins. Enzymes involved in doing this glycolysis pathway, you see those proteins maximum. There are of course huge number of proteins which are unmapped. We do not know which functions they do. I mean, if they may not do it very tandemly or in a very synchronized way. There are there, but in case of E. coli, we have large amount of proteins which are working for production of different kinds of amino acids, also production of ribosomes. Okay, ribosomes we saw there is a organelle, and in prokaryotes that's the only pretty clearly understandable organelle. Mesosomes are in some cases you will see, some cases you won't see, but ribosomes are the most prominent organelle, other than the nucleoid sort of thing. Again, S. cerevisiae, there is the yeast, scientific name for yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And here you see again, you see ribosomes, proteins required for ribosomes are maximum. It's not only ribosomes, protein required for translational factors. Ribosomes need some additional proteins to help them in translating. Okay, translation is a process when message from DNA is translated to a protein. Okay, that's translation process, and then they have RNA. So you see, proteins, regarding the protein synthesis itself. Ribosome is the organelle which is used only for protein synthesis, right? So that means proteins, maximum proteins are dedicated for protein synthesis. That's funny, but that is the truth here. In case of yeast, they have a large number of proteins, big size, big numbers dedicated for glycolysis again. One thing, we use yeast for fermentation of, fermentation process. So yeast, although it's an eukaryote and it's non-parasitic, but it loves to grow in anaerobic condition, meaning less oxygen condition, and then it that's why it continues glycolysis pathway more. It gets ATP or energy from glycolysis pathway. Also, the product of glycolysis pathway, somehow gets converted to alcohol or acetic acid. These are industrially relevant product. Okay, so that's why yeast has a major number of proteins which are dedicated for glycolysis. They are always there in the cells. How about human cells? Human cells, of course, you can see major proteins are dedicated for ribosomes and protein synthesis, a big number of proteins. You see, the real big sizes, individual proteins are majorly dedicated for protein folding or folding related catalysis. Okay, what is protein folding? We'll come to the point. And we also see that when these are eukaryotes has a very complex and large cell cytoplasm. Large cytoplasms need large management systems. One of the management system which can, allow the cytoplasm to connect to each other are the cytoskeleton. To stay in structure, cytoskeleton. So it is quite understandable for a large cells which can grow larger and larger. Eukaryotic cells, you all know eggs are eukaryotic cells, so you can say largest cells are eggs. But non-egg eukaryotic cells, you can see there are some protists which have they can grow up till a centimeter long, and that's with the single cell, unicellular cell organisms. 1 centimeter, just where is the proportion, you would ask. Okay, but they have the special way of a segmental cytoplasm. That is how they manage it. The whole cell body they manage. That probably is due to the cytoskeletal protein. So we understand in case of, we need more specific kind of proteins. In case of eukaryotes and especially humans, and when we go to prokaryotes, they need very general, very basic kind of proteins which majorly rule the things. Okay, so this is how the abundances of protein. So uh, we know that there are good amount of proteins in the cells. Now we know that proteins. These are the particular varieties of protein which actually are most important, and we saw a general purpose that protein relevant to protein synthesis itself, making of protein itself, are the maximum number. So what do we understand? How proteins are synthesized, how they are made? That's the important question. If they are doing so variety of things, then how they are being prepared so differently. So if you really see proteins and hydrolyzed proteins, you finally get amino acids. These are kind of building blocks of protein, and this look like this. In organic chemistry, you all know R is a side chain, and anything can be R value. For 20 amino acids, the R value can change from H to a most complicated groups. So do not worry about it. So if R is replaced with H, the amino acid is called glycine. Okay, and because this carbon has the central carbon, that is actually, if you go through the convention of IUPAC nomenclature, you have to start counting from this way. Okay, and so this is the second carbon, and also called carbon because it is asymmetric in nature. So the species which are connected to this is different. If it is H, it gets certain kind of symmetry. Okay, but it is connected to oxygen. Oxygen is negatively charged. Two oxygen atoms. It is connected to a carbon atom, which is connected to two oxygen. This is connected to a nitrogen atom directly. Okay, nitrogen atom, when they gain proton, normally they can gain proton and they can form ammonium ion. So these are positively charged. So that's why we call amino acids as zooter ionic. Amino and acid. Aminos meaning which can nitrogen based basic compounds. Okay, and acids meaning here it is carboxylic acid. Okay, because it's organic compound, we cannot have sulfuric acid attached to it, so it's a carbonic acid. Carbonyl group and carboxylic acid. So what are the types of amino acids you can see? Um, we can there could be 20 different kinds of amino acids, and they can build how many we just saw that in a eukaryotic cell, that to human we can have 10 billion proteins. Okay, so the real number could be 20 to 30 billion. Okay, 3 to 4 times it can multiply, but it's in the order of billions. And how many varieties exactly? Then we saw a lot of proteins are repetitive. Okay, like ribosomal proteins are very repetitive. Like they are more in numbers than other proteins. Maybe other proteins are one or two in numbers. Okay, so but what are the total number of proteins they can produce? The total number of proteins, still there are some confusion, but total types of proteins. According to Human Genome Project (HGP) in 2000, they came up with 45,000 proteins. There are total 45,000 proteins, and this can be questionable, very much questionable. Okay, initially it was believed to be 1 lakh, but they concluded that there are exactly 45,000 varieties of proteins. Now this is a bit of questionable, but you understand these are thousands. Okay, it could be hundreds of thousands also. You just understand. Now they are simply made up of 20 amino acids, meaning 20 amino acids, varieties of amino acids as monomers they can make it. How do they make? Each amino acid joined to another amino acid through a peptide bonding linkage. This is how peptide bonding happens. Suppose this is an amino acid. This amino acid is methionine, and this amino acid is most likely trypto. It's tyrosine. Okay, OH. It ends with OH. It's a tyrosine amino acids. So this is already this COOH, this carboxylic group, is attached to the amino group of another amino acid. See that? Okay, and now this is called a peptide bond. Peptide bond is considered one of the most strongest bonds because it's not because it's between carbon and nitrogen. It's not because it's a single bond. It's because the charge distribution across the bond is very defined, and that's why the electron cloud, when a peptide bond forms, all of a sudden takes a stiff angle. Okay, uh, so they become very rigid. Electron cloud become very rigid when there is the presence of a peptide bond. And a protein is actually multiple amino acids joined with peptide bond. Suppose this is another amino acids being joined. New peptide bond is being formed. Okay. Okay. So where does new amino acids keeps on joining in naturally? It is in the carboxylic end. You see, this is the old uh, peptide. We can say uh, uh, when there are more than one amino acid joined through a peptide bond, we can call them a peptide. Okay, and when there are and two amino acids dipeptide, more than two amino acids polypeptides. Okay, normally we can call peptide. Okay, and insulin is 50 amino acid protein. Okay, so people are confused whether to call it a peptide, whether to call it protein. So there is a bit of confusion, but anyway, it's a protein. Okay, so this is how a peptide bond happens, and you see this is water comes out, and nitrogen and carbon directly forms a bond. Often these needs enzymatic support. See, normally in laboratory also we can do the synthesis. And now we can make protein chains of good amount of length. So laboratory also we can do, but they need very specific conditions, temperature. Living system does it in that nanoscopic size of a cell. Okay, couple of cubic micrometer size area, they do this job. Even I think in fraction of micrometer cubic micrometer area. As we see, it happens in E. coli as well. Now, we saw amino acids are of varieties. Now, why not a single protein has multiple of the same amino acids? Is it possible? Is it naturally possible? Mm, you can synthetically you can make those peptides, but when you try to fish out some peptide, which peptide or protein, which is made up of a single chain of only one variety of amino acids, we normally say polymers, no? Meaning one variety of monomer is repeated. So that is really not possible in living system. They don't make this kind of proteins. If they make also, that protein will not work. We'll come to that. Okay. So we understood this is how a protein is made. Protein is made out of amino acids. Amino acids are connected to each other through a peptide bond. Peptide bond happens due to the condensation reactions between COH group of one amino acid and NH2 group of the another amino acid. Okay, you see that. Does the side chain react? No, they do not react here. Okay. What is their relevance? Their relevance, I'm just coming to that. So the side chain, what are these side chains? Side chains can be, depending on the side chain, there are 20 amino acids. So they can be very hydrophobic, they can be very hydrophilic, they can be acidic, they can be basic, they can be negatively charged, they can be positively charged. So, they can have sulfur actively operating sulfur there, which can potentially make disulfide bonds. So there are varieties of amino acids there, and these varieties of amino acids, when they are put together, you know, they, as we discussed, soft forces, yes, van der Waals forces, mild electrostatic forces, and what else? The third one, hydrophobic interaction forces, right? So here you see, when you place a chain of amino acid, like you have a protein chain now ready, when you place a chain of amino acids, and these amino acids are of different nature, individually, these amino acids somehow interact with each other, and you know it's kind of a miracle. Hydrophobic amino acids tend to come near hydrophobic amino acids. Hydrophilic amino acids tend to come near hydrophilic amino acids. Slightly negatively charged amino acids tend to come near slightly positively charged amino acids. And this goes on. Finally, you see, there is no more a chain. It's kind of, a magnetic balls. You try to make a chain out of it, and somehow your younger brother disturbs it. It finally takes a shape, and it makes a ball. It makes a square, cube, or somewhere in between. But it makes a three-dimensional shape. It takes it because of the ball interacts with each other in a different fashion. The magnetic balls. I think you all know small metallic magnetic balls. Nowadays it's very popular. During lockdown, many people were playing with them. So this is how this. What is the role of your side chain amino acids? Side chains of amino acids. Okay. Now let's understand how proteins are synthesized. Now you see here. This is a ribosome. We just saw that in the other day video. Okay, this is a ribosome. It has got a smaller unit, larger unit. We discussed everything properly in the cell biology class. In the module 2, but I reserved ribosome for. I said we will discuss ribosome later. This is the day I reserved it for, because ribosomes cannot be described without discussing protein synthesis. That is the sole or and only role a ribosome does, and it does so fascinatingly. You know, just see here, uh, ribosomes produces protein. This is a growing polypeptide chain. But how do they take polypeptide chains? Ribosomes majorly are made up of RNA, ribosomal RNA. Then there are individual amino acids being transported towards the growing protein chain or peptide chain. These individual amino acid transferase transferring devices are another RNA molecule that is called transfer RNA molecule. RNA is not DNA actually. Another kind of nucleic acid. Okay, just remember that. Uh, you remember that coronavirus has genetic material of RNA. RNA can also take shapes, sizes, and does many different functions. Um, and here in protein synthesis, RNA plays a major role here. This is the ribosomal RNA which makes the overall device setup for the protein production, the overall plant. The plant has this carrier of individual amino acids, that is the transfer RNA. The protein they have to produce, okay, what kind of protein they have to produce, which sequence. I mean, you can put any amino acids in the number, but to make a particular kind of protein, you need a proper arrangement of amino acids one by one, else you will not be able to get a proper protein. So how would you arrange amino acids properly in sequence to get suppose A protein or B protein? That message comes from ribosome. Ribosome doesn't have that message. Ribosome only has the machinery to make the protein, but that message comes from DNA. DNA sends a messenger RNA. This is a coded language. It's a chemical coding, as you see, and we can see a sequence here also. Okay, some yellow beads are arranged accordingly. This messenger RNA has a code. This code is read by the tRNA in the ribosomal complex. Here is the ribosomal complex. If the tRNA has exactly matching amino acid, it will can exactly read the code. Then it can actually add amino acid to the polypeptide chain. Else it will not add. There are two other tRNA. I mean, there are more tRNA waiting in the line. There are some tRNAs which are exiting once after adding the amino acid. Believe it or not, tRNAs are also of different varieties. They almost 20 varieties of tRNA will found in the cytoplasm, because 20 variety of tRNA has to hold 20 amino acids. They are the amino acid carrier. One one tRNA cannot carry multiple or different kind of amino acids. Why they are so specific? Because they do have this particular code reading phase. That code reading phase is of that particular kind. It will read that particular code in messenger RNA for that amino acid. If there is another code, amino acid has to be changed, so other tRNA has to come to the picture. Okay. So you see, protein synthesis pathway is a very complex pathway, and as I just told you, ribosomes are made up of two subunits, 40S, 60S. This is mammalian ribosome, 80S ribosome. 18S ribosome, totally. Sorry, 80S ribosome. So each ribosome will have the rRNA, ribosomal RNA, and protein. You can see 49 varieties of proteins constitute one ribosome. Another 33 varieties of protein and 18S RNA constitutes the small unit. Okay, so this is a very complicated process, but it's executed so flawlessly. Then your protein chain is being produced now. Now, how many ribosomes are in cellular volume? That's another calculation here. Per cellular volume, if you say E. coli may have 50,000 ribosomes. That's the reason you see you have maximum proteins dedicated for ribosome. Ribosomes are enough in number. Okay, because every time each cell makes protein, breaks protein. Once it breaks protein, it needs to replace those protein with fresh protein. So that's why ribosomes are there. Now, if you make a chain of amino acids, will that be a protein? May not be. Okay. If you have a chain of amino acids, then we can call it as a primary structure. This is how the chain of amino acids looks like. And when you see it deeply, these three-letter words are the kind trying to make you clear what is the kind of amino acid we have. So protein synthesis started from one amino acid here, and subsequently other amino acids are being added in the carboxylic end. If you add more amino acids, also it will. This is the primary structure of proteins. You can see that. It's a chain of amino acids, nothing else. But the chain of amino acids often, because of their side chains, uh, R group, whatever functional group is there in the R, they interact with each other. So when they interact with each other, either they make an alpha helix, okay, like DNA is helical in nature, this can also be helical in nature. Protein can also be helical. A chain of amino acids can assume a helical nature. What is the nature of the helical protein? The center core portions of the internal side of the helical chain will be taken up by the hydrophobic amino acids. Outer side would be faced by the hydrophilic amino acids. That's a very simple phenomenon, and there are very this is a very determined, defined structure. Okay, and we can have a small portion of the chain also can form a sheet-like appearance. It will look like an asbestos sheet. Okay, asbestos sheet, a wavy asbestos sheet. You can see that. We call it beta strands or beta sheets. Okay, when they appear in parallel sheets, so that it almost appears like asbestos. So here these chains are are there, but they bond each other through hydrogen bonding, special hydrogen bonding. We all know how hydrogen bonding works. I do not have to explain, I guess. So now this is the primary structures of protein. With the primary structure only, you can see the spider silk, one of the toughest, strongest material in the world, is made up of beta sheets, majorly beta sheets. Remember that. The silk protein, the spider thread proteins are majorly this configuration, beta sheet configuration. Now we can have tertiary structure. Tertiary structure, when an alpha and beta sheets, they multiple alpha and multiple beta sheets, try to come together and make a overall protein or structure. We call it a tertiary structure. Okay. So this is about a single protein chain. Single protein chain can exist, finally makes a protein with a secondary structure, meaning now things are in its places. Okay. Now what is quaternary structure? Many proteins are composed of multiple subunit proteins. Lot of small proteins are involved. So when lot of small proteins are involved to make a single protein, like hemoglobin itself, it is not a single protein actually. Hemoglobin is made up of 4 subunits of protein. Okay, so it's a quaternary structure. When you say hemoglobin, you are looking at the structure, how it looks. It is a quaternary structure. So here multiple small proteins are there, 2 subunits of that same proteins are there. You see, it's a dimeric. We normally call that dimeric protein. Dimer, monomer, dimer, something like. So now we have in tertiary and quaternary conditions, proteins are ideally functional. Some proteins are single polypeptide chain, done. They do not need quaternary structures. But some many proteins need quaternary structures. Okay. So now here in this case, the quaternary structures are all alpha helix joined together. Okay. In case of hemoglobin, you see alpha and beta helix, sorry, majorly alpha helices. Light blue and dark blue are 2 different kind of subunits, but made up of total 4 subunits. So 2 blue, light blue color springs coils you can see, or 2 purple color spring coils. So when you see, all these are individual 1 subunits of protein. So alpha subunit, 2 alpha subunits, deep purple color or deep blue color, and 2 beta subunits. Okay. Beta subunit is a single amino acid chain. Okay. And where do you see the iron heme group, which contains the iron at the center? Actually, each hemoglobin molecule can contain 4 iron. Okay. So among its 4 subunits, they are trained to have individual heme group or heme group, or you can say that, which contains the iron. Now the question comes that, okay, the protein is such a long chain. If I simply do change one amino acid in the whole sequence, what is the problem? Can we change it? We can change it chemically. We can do, yes, but whether this thing will be valid in a living system, can't say. Just see that I'll just give you an example. if you simply change one amino acid in a whole sequence of protein. We just realized that it's a red blood cells, RBCs, which we all have in our blood, okay? And we all know it contains hemoglobin, and hemoglobin transports oxygen and carbon dioxide to our tissues and from our tissues, okay? We all know that. And that means this is one of the most functional protein in the overall RBC cells. Now, you just change one amino acid in hemoglobin. Okay, this is the condition. In the beta chain, okay, the light blue chain there, and here it is the yellow chain. In the beta chain, what do you do here? You change amino acid number sixth amino acid. You just change to GLU for glutamic acid to VAL to valine. What is glutamic acid? What is valine? Just show you here. Valine is a hydrophobic amino acid. Can you see that? It's a hydrophobic amino acid. And glutamic acid is a hydrophilic amino acid with a negative charge at pH 7.2. pH is very important here. Okay, as it is a complete alkane, you know, it doesn't like water anyway. So, hemoglobin, if you have um, so hemoglobin chain, its normal chain which has got glutamic acid is replaced with valine, and what happens here? A single amino acid change in one subunit, not all subunits also. In one subunit of hemoglobin will end up giving you a sickle cell anemia. Your RBC will not appear the way it appears now, double disc shape, meaning biconcave shape. It will turn to a sickle shape. Okay, that's called sickle cell anemia. It has reduced capacity of oxygen carrying, and also often it clogs your veins here. You see here. How does it happen? You see, in a single RBC, hemoglobin are placed in a equally spaced area. Okay, they are spaced equivalently and they are placed partially because of repulsions from each other, and they manage to stay aloof. But if you change the valine, glutamic acid to valine, you see the hemoglobin molecules tend to clump together, and that's how it changes the overall shape of the hemoglobin. So one amino acid change can destroy the whole protein. It cannot, because see, it can destroy its own secondary structure. Luckily here secondary structures aren't destroyed so much, but effectively its quaternary structure and supramolecular assembly. Molecules also do their self-assembling accordingly or self-spacing accordingly. Here that is being affected with a single amino acid. There are many other mutations. We call these small changes as mutations, okay? And this is a real disease. It's not a speculated one. We saw sickle cell anemia, but later on found this is the reason why sickle cell anemia happens. And what you see here, underneath there is a code for individual amino acids, okay? And when you really gauge here, when the amino acid changes, you normally see tRNA doesn't do the mistake. The mistake is in the wrong mRNA, wrong messenger RNA. There was a wrong message which has come from the DNA, okay, and that has caused change in glutamic acid, 6th glutamic acid to a valine of this beta subunit. Now if you have a single now you have all amino acids in place, and what will you do? Will you get a proper protein? As I say, it's a miracle to how this hydrophobic amino acids automatically comes to hydrophobic amino acids to interact with each other and makes the protein, okay, and makes the secondary structure. But there is some science attached to it. we got to know now is that these proteins aren't alone. As we saw, the next largest lump of kinds of protein you see in the eukaryotic cells are protein folding catalysts. These are actually protein folding catalysts called chaperonins. These are large, extremely large proteins, as if it is a hangar and it is holding a lot of spacecraft. No, it's a very large protein, and it contains a single polypeptide chain. When it enters into a chaperonin, it can finally come out properly folded, meaning it's each secondary structures connecting to proper. Uh, Although the chain doesn't break, remember that. Yeah. Chaperonin doesn't have anything to do with breaking of chain. Those are other enzymes. In case of insulin, it's a single polypeptide chain, but it has got two chains. Okay, because single polypeptide chain, in between it has chopped into two chains somehow. But many a protein, they still stay as a single chain, and they are just
Excuse
folded
me, sir.
properly. Yeah.
Sir, we have a class at 5.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just overtook the class. I'm sorry to say. That would be all for the class. We will discuss the rest of everything in the next class. Routines are more or less done.